Hi, it's Wendy Cumming-Potvin back again with EDU610 Introduction to Research for Educators. We're today talking about Topic 1, Designing and Conducting Research. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Now, before we move too readily into our content this week, an item that is useful for us as we study, particularly at the postgraduate level, is being aware of how we're feeling. So for instance, how are we responding if we're reading or taking notes, etc. So it's about being aware and being more readily available to manage our emotions. For example, as I mentioned, if we're reading complex articles, if we're taking notes, or later down the track, if we're writing for an assignment. Now, some of you may have a good deal of experience with postgraduate study. Some of you may just be starting out, but in either respect, here are a couple of articles that could be worth reading. These articles focus on how we can regulate, self-regulate, and how to develop and practice self-regulation. And increasingly, research has demonstrated that being strategic in this way can also enhance our academic performance. So have a look if you're interested. And just looking back on our focus questions from last week for the introductory topic readings, we were asking about why do we do social research or educational research, and what counts as good educational research, and who decides. Now, please have a look again at Walter, that is the unit text, and in particular, there is a nice reading from Hostetler, 2005. Just looking back at some of the terminology we employed last week, first of all, we talked about ontology, really meaning our understanding of reality that informs our worldview. Second, we talked about epistemology, which is really about how knowledge is defined and prioritized or valued. And thirdly, there was discussion of axiology, which really is about the values and attitudes that we have that inform our worldview in terms of making judgments. Here is a brief YouTube, which I suggest you have a look at, which will help you to better understand some of this terminology, as well as, of course, referring back to the unit text by Walter. Here is a brief activity to identify concepts such as ontology and epistemology. So what I'd like you to do is to read the abstracts of the following studies. The first one is from Ciampa and Gallagher, 2016, Teacher Collaborative Inquiry in the Context of Literacy Education, and it is in the peer-reviewed journal, Teachers and Teaching. And the second one is from Devos, Dupriez, and Paquet, 2012, Does the Social Working Environment Predict Beginning Teachers' Self-Efficacy and Feelings of Depression? And that is from the journal, Teaching and Teacher Education. But you could use any number of journal articles to engage in this activity. If you have a particular journal that is of interest to you, then by all means, please use that journal. And try to identify the ontological and epistemological assumptions underlying these studies. And ask yourself, how have these assumptions impacted on the researchers' methodological choices? And we've reached a point where I now have another question for you. It is, what is the difference between a research topic and a research question? This is actually quite a fundamental question in research. Alrighty, let's have a look at some sample research questions. The first one is a quantitative example. Do parent-teacher internet communications affect student performance in the classroom? And the second sample is a qualitative example. What types of internet experiences do parents have with teachers about the performance of the parents' children? So you can see that in a similar topic, there are broadly different approaches to understanding themes within that topic. And I have another question for you regarding the research question. If you look in the unit text, Natalier, 2019 from page 30, suggests that the research question forms the core of a research design. I'd like you to think carefully and ask yourself, why might this be the case? Often students will ask me, how do I generate a research question? Well, Natalier from 2019, and again, this is in your unit text, has some wonderful strategies for generating emerging research questions. The first is to read, and I would add read, and read some more. Second is thinking about concepts more than topics. Third is about finding puzzles. What is puzzling in the literature as you read it? The fourth is finding gaps and limitations in knowledge. And the fifth is being open to feedback loops. So sometimes we have a fixed idea in our mind when we start out our review of literature, but we need to be open about opening other doors and thinking about different ways into problems. Sixth is to talk to people. So talk to your colleagues, talk to your fellow students, talk to anybody that will listen. It's really important to talk to people about your emerging ideas. Seventh is write a question. In fact, I think I might say draft a question, because often we will write and write and write. It's really about an iterative process. It's about drafting, particularly in academia. And of course, then 8 is about rewriting that question. Often authors will give you tips for avoidance as well. So here are Natalie's tips for avoiding some things when you're developing your research questions. So first of all, Natalia suggests don't rush your research question. And I cannot stress this enough, because it really does take time and time again. It really is a lengthy process. Second, try not to pose extremely long and complicated questions that actually might be 2 or 3 questions in one. Third, try not to tie your question to a particular method. We said on that previous slide, try to remain open. So try not to have too much of a fixed idea, particularly in those early days. And fourth, try not to ask questions that have already been answered. You want your research to be relevant for as many people as possible. So in order to respond to the previous question about what is a research question and how is it different from a research topic, I'd like you to view the following YouTube clip. And this is from the University of Melbourne, from Steve Campitelli in the Academic Skills Department. And it's really quite a nice clip. And of course, although with resources, I don't always agree with every single word that is omitted or said, I really think that this clip captures quite nicely some of these differences and similarities. I think what is important as well is thinking about what is it that you want to know, and how is this research question significant not only for you, but for others? What is the relevance of your research question for society, for the research community? So it's more broad than, say, you and your friends or you and your family. This YouTube clip also talks about scoping, about how it's important not to go too large or not too small, but just right there in the middle somewhere, so that it is considered what we call operational. So if we were thinking about Goldilocks and the Three Bears, it might be about that mid-range. It's not Papa Bear's bowl, it's not Mama Bear's bowl, it's not Baby Bear's bowl, but somewhere in the middle. And remember that a question is not a statement. And this might seem trivial, it might even seem silly, but remember that a research question needs to finish with a question mark. I'd like you to have a go now in terms of developing a research question, just for an activity. Think about each of the current social issues listed below in this slide, and do keep in mind the do's and the don'ts of what we have just explored. So the first one is parents and children's choice of public or private high schools. The second is young people's study and work plans. And the third is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people dying in custody. These are topics that I would consider very relevant to contemporary society in Australia and mainly globally. I'd like you to ask yourself now, is this a topic or a research question? Youth engagement. So just thinking about the process of social research, I really love this image because it gives us that notion of iteration and meandering. So we know that the research process can often be unanticipated. We can be forced to circle back, jump ahead, jump back. It doesn't always move forward in a linear-like process. EZI from 2019, and again this is in your unit text in editor Maggie Walter, talks about the steps of social research. And the first one they suggest is identifying the topic, and the second one is focusing on a research question, even though it will be very emergent in the beginning. The third is specifying the theoretical framework, and I would suggest that the third and the fourth steps can be interwoven. I might even put the research methodology beforehand. Nonetheless, the fourth, developing a research methodology, and the fifth is delineating the main variables or processes. And again, if you are a qualitative researcher, you might not even be using terms such as variable. You might be saying the main themes or the main processes. And continuing on, as he suggests then, the sixth step is defining and or measuring, and the seventh is selecting a research sample and collecting data, and that is when students or researchers often go through to ethical clearance, and you won't be doing that in this unit, but that's just something to consider. And eighth is addressing the political and ethical dimensions. Ninth is analyzing your data, interpreting results, and 10th is writing up results of the research. And I would suggest that there is an 11th, that is the dissemination process. It's about how we get our ideas out there to the public and other people. So here is an activity for you to identify steps in the research process, as well as assumptions about research. So here you're going to read the summary and the research process of one of the 3 studies on pages 74 through 79 in EZI 2019, and that is in your unit text, Social Research Methods by editor Maggie Walter. So try to identify the ontological, epistemological, and axiological assumptions underlying the study. Then explain your thoughts on the LMS in topic 1 to your peers. Here is another activity for you to engage with. It's called My Working Dictionary. So you can peruse the terms on the handout, reflect on the definitions, and cross-reference with Walter 2019 or with online dictionaries, etc. Then, as you progress in the unit, add at least 1 term to this list, and then keep adding terms as you develop your vocabulary further in the unit. And this handout is available on the LMS in topic 1. Here is a simple diagram, a Venn diagram, to represent the beginning research of key elements that we've discussed thus far. So we're looking at, there's a research problem, there's a research question, and there's a review of lit, or a literature review. And you can see how what is of real interest is those overlapping areas of that Venn diagram. I know that students are always very curious about assignments and assessment, so I suggest that you have a walk through the assignment description and the cover sheet in the Unit Information and Learning Guide. If you have questions, please feel free and most welcome to contact me. And don't forget that Murdoch University has wonderful student support and advice, and this is free support and advice, so please do take advantage of these services. So today we've covered research questions and research topics, and we've looked at what the difference is between them. We've also looked at steps in the research process, and we have suggested that this is not necessarily a linear process. And as we look ahead towards week 3, I'd like you again to engage with the essential readings for topic 2 and to begin working, or at least thinking about, assignment 1. Enjoy the journey.